This happened in my hometown when I was 7 years old. I'm male and 42 now. I lived on an island off the coast of Washington State in a military town that's among one of the safest places to live in all of the US. But weirdos? Those cats are everywhere. Timing on this is vague for me, but since I was outside playing with my friends, it likely was a summer evening just before dinner time. We were screwing around, riding our bikes in the street, running around, doing all the usual kid stuff, when a car pulled up and stopped in the middle of our street. I don't remember exactly what the man driving it said, but he must have beckoned me over there because I know that I walked close enough to hear what he was saying. He asked me if I had seen any other kids wandering around because his were missing. I noticed then that there was also a woman in the car with him, so I just assumed she was the mom and he was the dad. I said no, that I hadn't seen any kids wandering around, but that there was a park nearby, right around the corner, and he might be able to find them there. Note, I was super proud of myself for thinking of this at the age of 7. The man then asked if I would be willing to get in the car and show them where the park is. Although I didn't understand just how dangerous the situation was, I was well aware of the whole stranger danger thing, so I said no. He asked again if I would please get in the car and help him find his kids at the park, and I said no, sorry, I can't do that. But I did give him directions on where to go. It was after my refusal to get in the car that this guy doesn't really miss a beat. He just reaches into his pocket, pulls out a fresh $5 bill. He holds it in his hand and says that he'll give it to me if I get in and help him find his children. Now, I can't lie. There's a moment there where I envision the haul I can get with $5 whole when the ice cream truck comes by. But then I remember that I have no issue asking my mom or dad for money. So, like the polite child I was raised to be, I say, no thank you. This prompt only seemed to push him even further down his script though, because then it changed to, well, for telling me where the park is, you deserve a reward. Here, you can just have this. All while stretching his hand out in my direction. At this point, I'm not sure what kept me from taking a step or two closer and claiming that money as my own. But I thank everything I know for not doing just that. I simply turned around and skipped off to continue playing with my friends who were standing there watching this whole time. After a few more moments of watching us, he drove away. Well, a few minutes later, my mom came outside to call me in for dinner, and I bounded happily up the driveway to tell her how I'd helped someone. I was very excited to have done this for an adult, which will bring me to my final point at the end of this. I then explained the whole thing to her. I remember her face changing a bit, but she just nervously said, "That's very nice of you, son." And I felt a huge surge of pride. Maybe 20 minutes later, my dad gets home. My dad's a solid Navy dude. Black belt, used to be in pararescue. And he's so badass that Chuck Norris checks under his bed for my dad every night. My mom obviously told him what had happened. His reaction was far different from hers. He told me that although he was proud that I liked to help people, that I was to never, ever approach anyone that I didn't know like that again. He said, and I'll never forget this, and I've since passed this wisdom on to my own kids. Remember, adults should never be asking children for help like that. He told me I was lucky I hadn't gotten snatched, and to always remember it, because they would have lost me forever if things had gone badly. He was stern, which hurt my little ego, and I lost a tiny bit of my innocence that day. Now that I've had over 40 years knowing my dad, I know that he was only stern because that's his reaction when he gets frightened. Poor dude. Before all of this, I had once escaped the house as a toddler and was found wandering near a cliff in Japan. Another time, I left the yard when we lived in San Antonio to sell my action figures door to door. I'm sure he was wondering what fresh hell he was in for with a child like me. To wrap all of this up, I don't remember if my parents did anything with what I told them, but it's almost 100% likely that they did because they're solid, loving folks. To my knowledge, though, nothing ever came of it, and I never heard about any other instances like this again. Longtime lurker, first-time poster. I wanted to share a story that happened about 20 years ago, back when I was 15. My parents were divorced, and by this time, they had a pretty good working relationship. Their parenting styles were night and day, though. My dad was a strict military man, while my mom was an easygoing, good-time Charlie. At this point, they were splitting custody of me pretty much 50-50, 7 days on and 7 days off. My mom worked double shifts 6 days a week, and she was only ever home on Sunday nights. Because of this and the fact that my mom was also so lax with rules, she allowed me to pretty much do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. In the very few instances she would say no, I would still do what I wanted because there were pretty much zero consequences. At this time, my boyfriend lived about a mile from my mom, so needless to say, I couldn't wait until it was my mom's week. While at my mom's, I would sneak over to my boyfriend's house after his parents went to sleep. He was an only child, and his parents were pretty strict, just like my dad, and they didn't allow us to spend much time together outside of school. As soon as his parents would knock out, I would leave my house at say around 9:30, maybe 10 p.m., jog over to his house, and we would hang out until around 1:30. Then I'd leave for my early morning jog home. During my jogs, I would make sure to stay super vigilant. After all, it wasn't lost on me that I was a 15-year-old female jogging in the dark. Nobody knew where I was, and this was before cell phones were really a thing. I'm about half a block from home, and at this point, I always felt a sense of relief as soon as I was in my own neighborhood and able to see my mom's apartment building. As I continued jogging, I was passing the end of a driveway when this van pulls up out of nowhere and stops right in front of me. I didn't even see it coming. No spidey sense, no nothing. I stopped so abruptly that I almost tripped face first into the passenger side door. When I look up, I see two older men in the front seat with their windows rolled down, staring me up and down. It was this slow gaze, and I could feel their eyes burning into every inch of my body. The passenger leaned out the window, getting as close to me as he could without opening his door, and then asked if I wanted a ride. He then smiled the most cartoon villain smile that I'd ever seen. While staring into his dark eyes, everything else around us seemed to fade away. It was like they were the only thing that existed at this point in time. My vision zoomed in on them, and I could feel my fight or flight kick in. Although being a teenage girl, it was really flight or flight. I quickly decided which direction to run in, and that was the direction that they came from. I knew the alley they had pulled out from was too narrow for their van to make a turn, so they would have to pull out into the street to make a U-turn. I had never run so fast in my life. I knew that I didn't have enough time to make it all the way to my mom's building before they came back. So I ran to the closest building and hid behind the large trash can alongside of it. My heart was slamming into my chest, and I was covering my mouth to muffle both my breathing sounds and my silent cries. I could hear the rocks and the loose asphalt being crushed by tires as these creeps slowly crept by the trash can. They stopped right out in front of it for what felt like an eternity, and they whispered something to each other that I couldn't quite make out. They didn't get out of the vehicle, but they kept moving forward slowly, likely stopping periodically to see if they could see or hear me. I waited until they were out of sight, then stood up, took a deep breath, and sprinted the rest of the way home. Once I was inside, I locked the door, found my way to my room, and buried myself under the covers of my bed. That night was the last time I would ever jog to that boyfriend's house. Many years ago, when we were young, stupid, and full of idealistic optimism, we were newly married and working shitty mall jobs. My husband and I had this friend in need. He was my husband's coworker. His name was Jack. Jack was about 8 years older than us and was in the middle of a messy breakup with not one boyfriend, but two. Sort of a package deal, if you will. They all lived together. Jack was being kicked out, and he needed somewhere to move in a hurry. Our lease was up soon, and he offered to pay half the rent if we upgraded to a 2-bedroom and let him move in with us. It seemed like a sensible enough plan. We liked Jack and felt sorry for him. In addition to his relationships ending badly, he had been through a lot in life. There was the kind of standard stuff, like growing up in a homophobic environment, having to join the army to get an education, and of course dealing with the don't ask, don't tell policies involved. Then you want to add in he was working a shitty mall job and pushing 30. But there were also other tragedies in his past, and we felt protective of him. He had been addicted to drugs and had gone through recovery 10 years before after dropping out of art school. He had been in an abusive relationship with a guy who had shot at him. He had depression and took an array of prescriptions and had very shaky self-esteem. But there was one tragedy that seemed to tower over it all. When he was in high school, before he came out, he had a girlfriend named Steffi, who he had truly loved. This was his best friend. Steffi had gotten pregnant, but near her due date, she was in a terrible car crash and was rushed to the hospital. They were able to save the baby, but not her. Jack had raised his daughter Melissa the best that he could. He joined the army to support her and get better employment prospects. Unfortunately, that meant that he had to sign custody over when he was deployed. He signed it over to Steffi's parents, and when he returned, they went to court and used the fact that he was gay against him. Jack never regained custody. Now he had to pay hundreds in child support to them every month and only saw his daughter, who was at that time going on 10 or 11 years old, twice per year. Periodically, he would get a picture of her and show it off at work. She looked just like him, except the girl version, of course, and she would write him letters about how much she missed him. It was just so sad and unjust. But tragic past aside, Jack was fun to hang out with, and I was looking forward to sharing space with him. We liked to do the usual stupid 20-something mall worker stuff, mostly revolving around drinking and going out, buying stuff that we didn't need, and watching far too much TV. Jack was a great conversationalist, a great listener, and even liked to cook. We were going to have a blast, I just knew it. We moved into the new place and everything was going well. It was awesome having to pay so much less in rent and having basically a constant social hour at home. At least, at first. The first problem came only a few weeks in. Jack didn't come home one weekend, even though he was supposed to meet us to go somewhere. When he finally called to check in, he was crying. He had been so despondent about his breakup and everything that he said he had relapsed for the first time in 10 years and used cocaine. He assured us it would never happen again. He already felt terrible about it. I don't know any technical details about drug addiction, but this unsettled me. Yet I figured that if it really was a one-time lapse, he could pull himself together again. And for a few months, everything was back to normal and seemed great. We went on camping trips, out to clubs, worked on art projects together, went shopping for clothes and accessories. It was basically the stereotypical gay man, straight woman BFF dream come true, and everyone was happy and content. But alas, Jack started disappearing on a regular basis, eventually missing out on not just social appointments, but work shifts too. I suspected obviously that drugs were the problem, but had no clue what to do about it. I started pressing a little bit to get him to tell me what was up, and he just said that he was depressed. Steffi's parents had successfully gotten an order to increase his child support payments, and he was feeling pinched and even more despondent about his daughter. I was understanding of this, of course. He had pictures of Melissa all over his room. It was clear that this was a huge deal to him. One weekend, he was acting especially depressed and went missing completely. He missed work, wasn't answering his phone. I called hospitals and so forth looking for him after trying the usual friends and hangouts. Eventually, we physically went out to look for him. It had been 3 days without a trace. We were afraid that he had tried to hurt himself. This is something that he'd talked about before. When finally, he stumbled back into our house, and here's what had happened. He had been at Starbucks, and some guy had started slinging gay slurs around, and they got into a fight. As a consequence, Jack had spent the weekend in jail. Not long after this incident, Jack went off to visit his daughter for one of the 2 times that he got to see her that year. They were meeting in San Francisco, which seemed odd, as she lived in the Midwest. But whatever, it was vacation season. While he was away, I got an email from a man that I didn't know, asking me if Jack was going to bring Tina with him down to SF. I had no clue who this man was, or who Tina was for that matter. Some of you out there may know, I'm sure. I sure as hell know now. And how the hell did this guy get my email address? Of course, I started investigating, trying to figure out what was actually going on. And it didn't take me long to find out that Tina is a slang term for crystal meth. I was of course suspicious given Jack's past. And then something started nagging at me. Questions I had about the situation with his daughter. Subtle things that just didn't add up. Since Jack was out of the apartment for a good couple of weeks, I did something that I know no one endorses doing. I snooped through his things. I knew something wasn't adding up, and I had to know if he was telling the truth about this distant daughter. I looked through his desk, and I found his old high school yearbooks. I found out Steffi's last name, and I started combing through public records. Newspaper obituaries, Social Security death records, the white pages. Steffi, Jack's dead girlfriend, alive and well in rural Indiana. Absolutely the same person, verified with both birth dates and photos. So what about the daughter? Maybe she was still real. After all, there were all those photos and she looked so much like Jack. But it didn't take much longer before I discovered the truth about that too. Melissa wasn't his daughter. She was his niece, his brother's kid. But I had seen him writing checks for child support. So what was really going on? The rest of this came down like dominoes. Jack had never been in the Army. He never went to art school. He did not go to San Francisco to visit his daughter. But a look through his instant message log confirmed run some drugs and party. Pretty much nothing he told us had ever been true. It was all one big tragic lie told very convincingly by a sympathetic character named Jack. And he was coming back the next day to live under our roof and do God knows what kind of drugs and tell further lies. What should we do? We were trying to figure out how and when to confront him and possibly kick him out when he got back. We tried to just act normal, and since Jack had such a disarming personality, it was pretty easy to just dissociate what we knew and enjoy joking around with him like usual. We were still trying to figure out how to deal with the situation when Jack had a new crisis come up. He had gone to the clinic and tested positive for HIV. Nightmare come true. Of course, we were there for him as he dealt with this. We held his hand, listened to him talk, gave all the support that we could. Though I admit it was in the back of my mind all that time. I wonder if this is really true, or if this is just another lie to get sympathy. Of course, you could never ask for proof of something like that. And just as much, you could never kick a friend out when he was dealing with such a life-changing blow. So we decided to just sit on what we knew, let him adjust and cope, and then maybe find some trumped-up excuse to move out on our own later that year. Just quietly slip away. I did tell him I had gotten that weird email though, and asked him directly if he was using meth. Without hesitation, he said no. Jack kept talking about his daughter and started agonizing about how he was going to tell her that her dad had HIV, and how if he died, he could at least be with Steffi. Oh, biting my tongue was so hard at that point, but it would have been just too cruel not to. But that's when things started to get even weirder. Jack started coming on to me. Yeah, supposedly he was the gayest gay who ever gayed, and of course I was married. Not only that, but to his supposed best friend. I didn't take it as seriously as an affront, accordingly figuring that he was just being jokey or ironic at first. But it only started to ramp up, and it was even more confusing than anything so far. Other weird things started happening too. He started wearing really odd outfits, like a hippie skirt. He didn't usually cross-dress for the record, and a faux fur coat with a fedora. He would go out in public like this. Now, he didn't seem psychotic, and he said this was his form of gender expression. Okay. Our kitchenware and dish towel started disappearing. Completely disappearing. He spent a lot of time in his room and then going out to the woods to think. When he would come back from the woods, sometimes he would be normal, but other times he would be all emotional and would have some story to tell about a weird thing that had happened to him. The weirdest was when he came back from the woods with blood on his clothes and shoes, his hair matted, smelling like blood and stale cigarettes. He said that he had gone to visit friends, a couple he had met through an HIV-positive support group, and who had been dealing with depression. When he got to their house, their lights were off and something was wrong. He broke the side door down and found them both gorily dead, seemingly a murder-suicide. He called the police and then took off to the forest to have a nervous breakdown. He told the story in chilling detail, talking about stepping in splattered brains and washing it off in a creek, all while smoking a full pack of cigs. But the strangest part of that episode was how he tried to tell us that they had deeded the house to him, so we could all move in as soon as the biohazard crews had cleaned it up. In the middle of all of this, he lost his job, and we had to shoulder more and more of the expenses. There was no question that he was on drugs now, obviously. His behavior had really deteriorated that much. Normally, you would just go to court and evict a roommate with all this going on, but again, he had been a friend of ours, and supposedly just been diagnosed with an expensive, life-threatening disease. Admittedly, it would have looked really bad on us if we had kicked him out and he was telling the truth about having HIV. Then we would be the heartless ones. Plus, the legality of starting eviction processes was super complicated because he was on the lease. We were stuck and a little frantic, and every time we would start to get a plan together, he'd throw some more weirdness our way. He went to the pound and got a dog. Since he was off thinking, read that as doing drugs all the time, I took care of that dog most of the time. Sometimes he would get all mad and insist on taking her with him though, which I hated because when he came back days later, she seemed hungry and sad because he likely wasn't taking proper care of her. Man, it would take another post entirely to tell all the weird stuff that happened in this last chapter. At some point, he found religion and started reading books by Rick Warren. Yeah, no shit. He tried to get me to watch weird porn with him. He kept obsessing about my boobs, and we caught him listening through the door to catch us having sex. But mostly, he was gone all the time. His room hermetically sealed with weird smells coming out of it, and us quietly terrified and exploring our legal options to get him the hell out. We had to sneak around to try to figure this out. He had started obsessively listening in on us in our room. So we would park our car at the far end of the parking lot and sit out there with the music cranked to talk and try to figure out what our next move was. Whenever we asked him about drugs, he'd just deny and started to get touchy about being asked. He had an answer for everything and a new story of woe or terror every week. And while we basically assumed he was lying about everything at this point, it was always stuff that was just too touchy to call out or impossible to prove. Thus, we started to feel like we were going a little bit crazy because we couldn't tell up from down anymore. At some point, I gingerly approached Jack about the daughter issue. He didn't try to refute my allegation that he had lied about his girlfriend dying and his niece being his daughter. He didn't apologize or explain or anything else. He just fell asleep, right then in the middle of the day in the living room. The dish towels started reappearing at this point. On the floor of the living room was something sticky. Well, I guess it could have been super glue. Finally, the weird smell coming from his room was bad enough that we had to find out what it was. He might not just be smoking. He might be actually cooking meth in there, right? And all of that terrible that would have been the last straw that would have justified kicking him out, even though he was struggling with disease and oppression and mental illness. So while Jack was out reading Rick Warren with some friends one weekend, my husband and I put on surgical masks, leather boots and gloves, and went into his room. The gear was because once we cracked the door open, we could see that it was piled 3 feet deep with debris, rotting food, sex toys, and other extremely disgusting things. Using ski poles to clear a path, we investigated. It looked like a psychotic, sexually deviant hamster had been in there. Clothes were piled on the floor, then peed upon. Boxes and papers had been torn into shreds. This is apparently a meth head thing. There was what we recognized as his usual going out bag thrown in the middle of the bare, stained mattress, its contents spilling out onto the bed. Lube, a Rick Warren book, and the hugest dildo anyone has ever seen. My spouse skied on over to check out the bathroom, and I went to Jack's computer desk. In the bathroom, our missing kitchenware seemed to have been appropriated to make a mini meth lab with some random household products. There was a little scale too, as well as some white powder, if there was any remaining doubt. The dish towels were in there too, covered in about 5 different bodily fluids. The toilet area? Well, it lives on in legend. He didn't appear to stand or sit or aim. It looked like he was just propelling stuff at the wall. But at the desk, I found something even more horrifying. An open instant message window explaining in no uncertain terms where Jack had gone that night. Not only had Jack been cooking and selling meth, not only had he been earning money through prostitution, we had suspected as much. He had been lending his dog out to other deviants. The desk was covered in note cards with instructions for other meetings, leaving no doubt about exactly what was going on. We just went and started packing our stuff. As fast as we could, I called my parents, and they agreed that we could stay with them until further notice. We started driving over carfuls of stuff, careful not to be caught by Jack, who no doubt would be pissed, because how could a lying drug addict with no job afford to live on his own? He was gone a lot, but he would come back at unpredictable moments, and now he was angry and paranoid, on edge a lot of the time. He claimed the police were stalking him. Was he paranoid, or was he about to get busted? We were scared to call the cops ourselves because what if they thought we were in on the drug stuff? How could we prove we weren't? It was nerve-wracking. Finally, we confronted Jack and told him that he had to get all of his drug stuff out of the apartment. We weren't going to go down for his crimes. He was furious and stormed out, drove away with tires squealing. We took that as our cue to gather up as much as we could and GTFO for good. Fortunately, he left the dog, so we were going to take her too. It was 3 a.m., and we were just about to leave for the last time when we heard his tires squeal into the parking lot again. He slammed into the curb, slammed his door, and started stomping up the stairs. We laid down flat on the floor in our room, hoping that he wouldn't realize we were there. He came into the apartment angry, declaring he was going to fuck us up. He was going to kill someone. He was destroying everything in the apartment loudly. I was really afraid we were going to die, and my brief life literally flashed before my eyes as his footsteps approached the door. I was curled around the dog, and suddenly, he was standing there. "Give me the dog. She's mine. Hand her over." I held onto the dog motionless. Then he yanked her up, and I couldn't hold on any longer. He stormed back out and squealed away. At that point, we finished packing and drove out to my parents. We stayed there for about a month, then settled the tab at the old place and moved into a new apartment, far away from the old neighborhood. We got a bunch of creepy calls and scary emails from Jack for a while. Worse, we saw him around in unlikely places. He even showed up at my parents' once, but didn't get out of his car or come to the door. I think I saw him once at the new apartment, but couldn't be sure because it was dark out. We were definitely on edge for a long time. Once he had been gone long enough, the landlords swamped out the apartment and threw out all of his stuff before sending him a bill. He IM'd me 2 years later and claimed he had gotten clean and sober. He wanted to know our new address so he could send us some stuff, but I evaded. I still don't really know if he had HIV, or what happened when he came home covered in blood, or what the story was about the niece, or what happened to that poor dog. There's a lot of unknowns left to unpack about this story, and I don't think we'll ever get the answers. I do wish Jack the best, but I have absolutely no problem keeping that insane, pathological liar far away from my life.